Welcome to Weekly Lit, Episode 6, Introduction to James Joyce. We're also going to discuss Edna O'Brien, another Irish author of later vintage, who's still writing, even into her 80s, or at least 80 currently. But James Joyce has a reputation of being wrongfully so, reputation of being difficult to read. Well, there is some justification given the complexity of Finnegan's Wake, certainly, and to a slightly lesser extent, Ulysses, which is a daunting read, but very rewarding and worthy of everyone's time and study. And but I'm going to give you the accessible entree into James Joyce, which is to start at the beginning, and that's where we'll work from. Now, it helps, of course, I'm of Irish descent, and as I mentioned before, have a family of avid readers. I have an uncle, Patrick Ryan, who is a man of letters and a Joyce scholar, and has studied James Joyce all his life and very great amount of expertise, and shared his Joyce library with me, thankfully, very much appreciated. And so I've spent a lot of time reading James Joyce, and the place to start is with now this is a not dog-eared but dog-eaten, well-worn copy of Dubliners, a book of short stories. And these were written in the early, actually during World War I, and prior to the Irish Revolution, or the uprising, in 1916. So James Joyce had left Ireland and wrote about it from a distance, and with some amount of disdain. He rejected the church. I think he to some extent thought that the Irish people were stifling themselves. Of course, there were outside forces stifling them, obviously. And perhaps his viewpoint was that they hadn't done enough to resist that, which soon after was changed, and very soon after, in 1916. And but the short stories of James Joyce, he's a very modern author. Over the course of his career, he changed his use of the language, and had a great amount of flexibility with words, made up words, portmanteaus, all sorts of nonsense words, but that you would know what they meant by the context and the sometimes the onomatopoeia and things like that, and he was a very earthy writer, very naturalistic. And as much as he was writing about maybe what he saw as the Irish people's fixation on the past, he also made no shortage of references to the past. I mean, Ulysses, the name of my first dog, Ulysses is obviously a reference to the Odyssey, and is structured to follow the Odyssey with thousands of references. Hamlet, the Odyssey, and Dante's Inferno, all kinds of classic literature and themes and philosophy. So while maybe outwardly bemoaning ties to the past, he certainly made reference to the past. And this collection, Dubliners, contains what is probably the greatest short story ever written in the English language, The Dead. It's the concluding, it was inserted late toward publication as the final story in the collection of Dubliners. And most people probably had to read it in high school or college, I hope. and but it's worthy of study and reading, and I think many people are familiar with that. The statement that perhaps those trapped in the past are more dead than those who are already dead. The common interpretation of it, and the by the way, there's a if you have an Audible membership, there's a free version of an audio version of Dubliners. It's about 7.5 hours long, read by, I forget the actor's name, it's an Irish actor who was in Bridesmaids, but he does a wonderful job. I just found that recently, and it's, like I said, it's worth listening to just to hear the tone of the language and so forth. But I'm going to read a selection from a different story, not The Dead, but from Grace, just a short excerpt from that, so you can hear how this language is completely accessible and evocative of some different things we'll get to after I read the excerpt, but very accessible. So this will remove the intimidation factor from James Joyce, I hope. Grace. It's from the very introduction of the story. Two gentlemen who were in the lavatory at the time tried to lift him up, but he was quite helpless. He lay curled up at the foot of the stairs down which he had fallen. They succeeded in turning him over. His hat had rolled a few yards away, and his clothes were smeared with the filth and ooze of the floor on which he had lain, face downwards. His eyes were closed, and he breathed with a grunting noise. A thin stream of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. These two gentlemen and one of the curates carried him up the stairs and laid him down on the floor of the bar. In 2 minutes, he was surrounded by a ring of men. The manager of the bar asked everyone who he was and who was with him. No one knew who he was, but one of the curates said he had served the gentleman with a small rum. Was he by himself? Asked the manager. No, sir. There was two gentlemen with him. And where are they? No one knew. A voice said, "Give him air, he's fainted." The ring of onlookers distended and closed again. Classically, a dark metal of blood had formed itself near the man's head on the tessellated floor. The manager, alarmed by the gray pallor of the man's face, sent for a policeman. His collar was unfastened and his necktie undone. He opened his eyes for an instant, sighed, and closed them again. One of the gentlemen who had carried him upstairs held a ding silk hat in his hand. The manager asked repeatedly, did no one know who the injured man was or where his friends had gone? The door of the bar opened and an immense constable entered. A crowd, which had followed him down the laneway, collected outside the door, struggling to look in through the glass panels. So that's just the very introductory excerpt. He's quickly revived, first with an attempt with water and then more successfully with brandy, which revives him. And there is a sort of, not to get too symbolic, but to get too symbolic, a resurrection that takes place at that point. And Grace, the title, meaning gift from God, follows throughout the rest of the short story to show that his colleagues and his wife hold an intervention. And it's funny, it's quite witty. And through the intervention, though, he attempts to become a better man. And of course, the question was always going to be whether he will or not, and what led him to that tussle where he, quote, fell down the stairs. Did not. But it's just a wonderful story and evocative of the time and the place, and again, rings of the past. The whole collection of stories is filled with people who might be, if you were being uncharitable, you'd call them flailing. If you were charitable, you'd say they're flawed. Aren't we all? And but it's a nice collection, great starting point to read James Joyce. and you can read through it in no time at all, with even setting aside some time for contemplation and cigar on the side to enjoy. So the remember weeklylit@gmail.com. Please send some emails, questions, recommendations, asking for recommendations or comments about what we've discussed so far, or what we want to discuss in the future. Coming up later this week will be a couple of bonus episodes with what I would call, what many people would call beach read recommendations. Some geared towards but not limited to men, and others geared toward but not limited to women. So we'll have 2 extra episodes, maybe shorter bonus episodes later this week. And but yeah, make comments, share this, spread it around. I'd like to build the viewership, the ever more exclusive viewership that we have, and get some dialogue going if we can. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. So, second portion of this is to highlight an author, Edna O'Brien, who was greatly influenced by Faulkner and began writing, even in the 1960s, with the Country Girls, and also from Ireland, also left Ireland when she got married to go to London. Joyce had done the same thing and went to the continent in the 20s, and or by the 20s, I should say. Edna O'Brien wrote about Ireland from the continent, or at least from England. I guess not the continent, but from England, and but from a viewpoint of not being there, and perhaps some wistfulness, but also a clear eye and a critical eye, often enough. And she was also, I think, a fan of Faulkner, which is reflected in her style, and Hemingway, which is reflected in her style somewhat. She's a very clear writer, but she also appeared in the Ernest Hemingway PBS documentary that aired about a month and a half ago. It's quite eloquent, and she was the Irish lady Irish writer who spoke about, I think, correctly asserting that Hemingway was not misogynistic whatsoever. And if you read his writing, you set aside what you might know about his life, but from his writing alone, you can sense that he understood women and loved women, which I agree with. I think that's evident from his writing. But anyway, Edna O'Brien is somebody to check out. She's maybe a little less well-known, not as well-known as she should be, but this collection is from 2011. Cat is doing a little background work over there. 2011, and it includes, and she also wrote or writes with a view to the past, without being tied down to the past, and that's where I think the Faulkner influence comes in. I think it happens with a lot of Irish authors and a lot of Southern authors. Faulkner said it: the past is not dead; it's not even past yet, or it's not even past. And she takes that to heart. Read a brief excerpt from her story, Plunder, which is as read from the beginning, but the entire story is more stark and devastating than I think even than The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is saying something. And I know she has a book from the last 5 years, I believe, called Girls, that I don't have yet. I haven't read it. That also has a similar theme and starkness, and I don't say edginess to it. That implies that it's being done to provoke something, but this is well, you just hear it in the words themselves. So this is Plunder by Edna O'Brien. One morning we wakened to find that there was no border. We had been annexed to the fatherland. Of course, we did not hear of it straight away, as we live in the wilds, but a workman who comes to gather wood and fallen boughs told us that soldiers had swarmed the town and occupied the one hotel. He said they drank there, got paralytic, demanded lavish suppers, and terrorized the maids. The townspeople hid, not knowing which to fear most, the rampaging soldiers or their huge dogs that ran loose without muzzles. He said that they had a device for examining the underneath of cars, a mirror on wheels to save themselves the inconvenience of stooping. They were lazy bastards. The morning we sighted one of them by the broken wall in the back avenue, we had reason to shudder. His camouflage was perfect, green and khaki and brown, the very colors of this mucky landscape. Why they would come to these parts baffled us, and we were sure that very soon they would scoot it. Our mother herded us all into one bedroom, believing we would be safer that way. There would be no danger of one of us straying, and we could keep turns at the watch. As luck had it, only the week before we had gathered nuts and apples and stored them on wooden trays for the winter. Our mother worried about our cow, and that by not being milked, her poor udder would be pierced with pain, and the milk would drip all over the grass. We could have used that cow's milk. Our father was not here. Our father had disappeared long before. On the third morning, they came and shouted our mother's name, Rosanna. It sounded different, pronounced in their tongue, and we wondered how they knew it. They were utter hooligans. Two of them roughed her out, and the elder tugged on the long plait of her hair. And then it goes on from there. We're running a little long on time here, so I'll leave it at that. But it's, like I said, a stark use of language. You can see the use of the words "Our Father," and perhaps questioning where their father was, but where God was in that language. As I said, it's a collection worth reading, as are many of her other novels. Edna O'Brien has quite a prolific writing history, although it's just slowed down a little bit lately. But anyway, just an author to check out. So we'll be back next week or later this week, with a couple episodes of beach read recommendations. Until then, thank you for your time. Read harder.